we've really stumbled upon something special today. It's Frankie Denson's FtnHill scrapbook. Our friend K. Brad Barfield over at ACN, that's Ashley County. Now, well, he's been neck deep in this thing.
Lucky him.
Yeah, Tim Hollis loaned it to him, and Brad just got it digitized. So for us, that means this amazing look into the past.
A direct line, really.
Exactly. And if you're aiming to, grasp the heart of a story quickly, this deep dive into Fountain Hill, Arkansas, what Brad calls a real frontier town, well, it's going to be perfect for you.
It really is more than just old papers, isn't it? It connects you straight to people actually building a community practically from scratch.
Yeah.
And what's really striking is seeing their priorities. I mean, establishing education that early on.
Wow. So our mission today, it's pretty straightforward, but I think really compelling. We're going on a journey through the early days of education, community life in Fountain Hill, all through this amazing scrapbook.
And the sources in there.
Oh, yeah. We're talking handwritten teacher licenses, stories that just make the past feel, well, present, school records, photos. It all paints this surprising picture of how the town grew.
You have to remember the context, too. 1851. Arkansas was still very much the frontier.
Right.
Ashley County itself was brand new. So for the community to formally incorporate the Fountain Hill Academy then, like the scrapbook shows,
Yeah.
that's a big deal, a real statement.
Okay, so let's dig into that. The scrapbook details the incorporation, 1851, Fountain Hill Academy. And it wasn't just, a casual thing. It was official, creating a space just for learning.
A dedicated space.
And here's a really interesting detail, the land it was built on. It was granted to Thomas C. Denson.
The War of 1812 veteran.
Exactly. It's almost like the town's future was literally built on ground tied to service to community.
That's a great way to put it.
And we even have the exact spot. Section 5, Township 16 South, Range 7 West. I mean, that kind of precision back then, it really shows they were serious.
Absolutely. Giving up land, especially land with that history, specifically for education, so early. It wasn't just practical. It showed a deep belief in knowledge for their future.
And they acted on that belief pretty quickly. The scrapbook actually names some of the first teachers.
Does it? Who were they?
D.D. Sims and John D. Colborn. And interestingly, Colborn apparently boarded with Thomas Denson.
See, it just shows how tightly knit everything was back then.
Totally. And later you see others stepping up. Dr. and Lady McDermott in 1855, Martin Van Buren Sparks in 56, W.F. Mack in 61. It really makes you wonder about these people coming out to the frontier to teach.
It does. And what strikes me is that even with turnover, which you'd expect, right, frontier life was hard.
Sure.
But they kept finding new teachers.
Yeah.
That persistence says a lot about the community's desire for education.
Okay, now this part is really something. The scrapbook has this little note about W.F. Mack.
The 1861 teacher.
Yeah. He apparently taught for only about 6 weeks. Then he left to fight in the Civil War. It's just such a stark human reminder, History wasn't just headlines. It directly hit daily life, even school terms, in a small town like Fountain Hill. 1 minute you're teaching, the next.
That really does bring it home, doesn't it? It shows how those big events were woven into personal lives. Education wasn't separate. It was shaped by everything happening around it.
So what were they actually learning back then at the academy? Given the times, it was likely the fundamentals, right?
Oh, yeah. Reading, writing, arithmetic.
The 3 R's.
Definitely. But also things like history, geography, maybe even some Latin.
Even Latin on the frontier.
It suggests they had aspirations, maybe for more classical kind of education.
Yeah.
And picture them learning penmanship with, like, quill and ink.
Oh, wow. Lots of memorization, I bet. Reciting lessons.
That was very much the method back then. Rote memorization, recitation, building that foundation through repetition.
And the classroom. Probably just one room, right? All ages mixed together.
Most likely. And boys and girls probably sat separately.
But the scrapbook says the academy wasn't just for lessons.
No, it quickly became a community hub.
Right. Civic meetings, debates. I'd love to have heard some of those frontier debates.
Me too. And things like box suppers, community meals.
Lyceum shows. What were those exactly?
Kind of like traveling lectures or performances.
Yeah.
Bringing a bit of culture, entertainment and ideas right to the town. The schoolhouse was often the heart of social life in places like that.
It makes sense. Fostered that community spirit beyond just the school day.
Exactly.
Now, here's a detail that raises some questions. The scrapbook mentions that later on, a black church and school were also built on the same grounds.
Right.
And thinking about the original property details from the 1850s, Well, the scrapbook hints the legal status of that land might have gone a bit murky over time.
Hmm. That's interesting. It suggests, the changing demographics, the social dynamics,
Yeah.
establishing separate institutions reflects the times, the segregationist realities, but it also makes you think about how land and resources were shared or not shared as the community evolved. It adds complexity.
Right. It's not always a simple story. Okay, moving forward in time a bit, the scrapbook takes us into what it calls the era of chalk, charcoal, and county examiners.
Before standardized certification.
Totally different world. Can you imagine? Becoming a teacher basically meant passing an exam down at the courthouse.
It's really striking compared to today's pretty rigorous processes. The scrapbook shows that in Ashley County, back in 1884, you could take this exam.
Right at the courthouse.
Seems so. And if you passed, you got a license to teach the basics for just 1 year.
1 year.
1 year. And no degree needed. It really highlights how much things have changed for educators.
And we actually have one in the scrapbook, an 1884 teacher's license.
Seriously?
Yeah, signed by N.W. Norton, the county examiner. It lists the subjects. Let's see. Orthography.
Spelling.
Right, spelling. Plus reading, writing, mental and written arithmetic, English grammar, geography, U.S. history, all handwritten on this printed form. It's this cool mix of like official business and local feel.
That document is fascinating. It shows what they prioritized back then, educationally, and how they assessed teachers. Even without requiring a degree, they expected a baseline knowledge across quite a few areas.
And this next bit, it made me laugh. The scrapbook has these old teacher greeting cards from the early 1900s.
Okay.
And they have this funny saying, 2 months ago I couldn't spell teacher. Now I are one.
That's good.
It's folk humor, right? But it also hints at something real. A lot of these teachers were really young.
Sometimes barely older than their students, I bet.
Yeah. Like maybe having a solid grasp of 10th grade stuff could qualify you to teach elementary school.
That humor kind of captures the, sometimes makeshift ways they had to staff rural schools. It's funny, but it also shows how much communities relied on local folks, often very young women, to step up and teach.
And these public teacher examinations were a big part of it. There's an announcement in the scrapbook from 1917 in Hamburg, Arkansas for one of these exams.
Picture that, showing up at the courthouse ready to prove your teacher material.
What do you think the exam was actually like?
Probably involve things like dictation, maybe answering basic geography questions out loud.
Solving arithmetic on a blackboard.
Yeah, definitely handwritten answers. And your success really depended on the local examiner's judgment. There was no standardization at all.
That lack of standardization is key. Competency was judged locally, very subjectively.
Which, might have made teaching more accessible in some ways, but it also likely meant inconsistencies in quality from place to place.
And the scrapbook reminds us many of these teachers were young women, often just out of high school.
Or maybe even still in high school.
Right, like Jessie V. Winchell, her license is in there. Imagine her, maybe 17 or 18, in a one-room schoolhouse.
With kids ranging from 6 to 16, maybe?
Yeah.
All in the same room?
The range in ages, the different learning levels,
Yeah.
that must have been incredibly challenging.
The demands must have been huge. Just managing that kind of classroom required amazing adaptability and resourcefulness.
And it wasn't exactly a cushy job, right? The scrapbook paints a picture.
Building the fire each morning for heat.
Cleaning the slate boards, keeping order with just your voice, maybe a ruler, no paid leave, not many resources.
The sheer physical work,
Yeah.
the limited supplies. It really shows the hurdles these early educators faced. They basically had to create the learning environment from the ground up every single day.
And the pay, well,
Probably not great.
could be script like local IOUs or just whatever cash the school board scraped together. Many teachers walked miles to school. They boarded with local families, often taught during the year, and then did farm work in the summer.
You can see how burnout would be a real issue.
Absolutely. But the scrapbook also hints at this real sense of dedication. And the community respected them for it.
Yeah, despite the tough conditions and maybe modest pay, there's evidence they were held in high regard. That respect shows how much the community valued education, even with all the challenges.
You'd apparently even see these licenses framed, displayed proudly in homes.
Like alongside family photos or religious texts.
Yeah. And even very young teachers might be called ma'am formally by neighbors. It shows the community recognized their importance, even if the qualifications weren't like today's.
That informal respect speaks volumes about their social standing. They were figures of knowledge, contributing hugely to the town's well-being.
And then there are the little human stories, the anecdotes.
Always the best part.
One story goes, a girl gets her license and jokes, "Well, I got the license but not the horse. Guess I'll walk to my class."
Ah, love it.
Another one is about an oral exam. The examiner asks which way the Mississippi River flows,
Okay.
and the person confidently answers, "Downhill."
Perfect. You have to appreciate the spirit, right?
Absolutely. And I think the key takeaway here is that these early teachers, yeah, they didn't have the formal certificates we expect now.
But they were trained by necessity, by experience.
And by the community's trust. They were absolutely vital in getting education started in places like Fountain Hill.
Exactly. Their commitment, their ability to adapt, and the community's faith in them that built the foundation for everything that came later, they were pioneers, truly.
Then the scrapbook shifts gears. It moves into what are called the Bright years.
Okay.
This starts with the arrival of a really key figure, V.S. Bright. He came to Fountain Hill in the summer of 1919. Sounds like he really shook things up.
V.S. Bright is significant because he was one of Arkansas's very first vocational agriculture teachers under the Smith-Hughes Act.
Ah, the 1917 federal law.
That's the one.
Yeah.
It aimed to modernize rural education, bring in practical skills, and Bright was right there, implementing it in Fountain Hill.
So, before Bright, the scrapbook suggests education could be a bit unstable, held in borrowed rooms, kind of vulnerable.
Yeah, maybe less permanent. But Bright came in with a real vision for improvement.
And he acted on it.
Yeah.
Under his leadership, they built a brand new schoolhouse in 1919, 5 rooms, 2 stories.
Wow, that's a big step up.
And maybe even more importantly, they consolidated smaller schools from nearby Milo, Welch, Pine Grove, Gardner into the Fountain Hill district.
That consolidation is huge. It means pooling resources, maybe getting better teachers, offering more to students from a wider area. A really pivotal moment.
And Bright's idea of education went way beyond just reading and writing.
A vocational focus.
Right. He championed learning by doing. The curriculum expanded livestock, soil science, sewing, even welding.
Practical skills for that community.
Exactly. Home economics and agriculture weren't just extras. They were seen as essential for the community's future. A real shift towards knowledge you could use immediately.
That really reflects the whole point of Smith-Hughes equipped students with skills relevant to the local economy. For a farming community like Fountain Hill, ag, and home ec were spot on.
And Bright must have been quite the leader. The scrapbook tells about a town meeting in 1919. He shared his vision.
And the community responded.
Enthusiastically. Pledged donations to support the school district. The scrapbook actually says the district went over the top.
That's fantastic. That level of community buy-in, that grassroots support, it shows real leadership and a shared desire for progress.
And his impact lasted. Decades later, former students still remembered him, remembered how he emphasized the value of their work, their connection to the land.
Sounds like he instilled real pride.
Yeah. And back then, vocational education wasn't seen as, a secondary track. For many in Fountain Hill, it was the main road to a successful future.
That's a crucial point. In that era, particularly in rural areas, vocational training wasn't less than academic. It was often seen as the most direct path to contributing to your family and community.
Following that thread of practical skills, the scrapbook really emphasizes home economics, especially from the early to mid-20th century.
More than just cooking and sewing.
Much more. It was about community building, even survival skills, especially during tough times like the Depression. Really crucial for self-sufficiency.
Absolutely. Home economics back then covered a huge range of essential life skills, things that directly helped families and the whole community stay resilient.
Young women learned budgeting, sewing, gardening skills that empowered them. And in 1940, Fountain Hill actually got a dedicated home economics cottage.
Funded by the WPA.
Yeah, the Works Progress Administration. That must have been a big deal, a symbol of the New Deal reaching rural towns, and a real validation of women's work and skills.
That dedicated building was a major investment. It provided the space, the resources, really elevating home ec in the curriculum and showing its value to the town.
But even before that cottage, women were already doing this stuff, right? Informal sewing circles, in churches, in homes.
Community support networks.
Mending clothes for people who needed them, making quilts to raise money for the school, finding ways to clothe kids during hard winters. It sounds like these gatherings were just as much about connection and helping each other out.
Those informal groups show the strong community bonds that already existed. Women supporting each other through shared skills and mutual aid. The formal school program really built on that foundation.
The scrapbook even has a photo of girls in a classroom with a sewing machine. It's simple, but it says a lot about bringing these skills into formal education.
Right.
And the WPA cottage itself sounds impressive. 2 stories, demonstration kitchen, canning equipment, fabric storage, pattern making upstairs, sewing downstairs.
Sounds very comprehensive.
And there's that funny anecdote about goats occasionally getting into the attic.
Ah, adds a bit of local flavor, doesn't it? But it shows the building was really used, really part of daily life. And the setup highlights how thorough the home ec program was.
And beyond just the skills, they were learning self-reliance, family economics, the dignity of labor. For young women whose options might have been limited then, this was real empowerment.
Practical skills that could lead to economic independence, or at least better household management.
These lessons would serve them well later, leading PTAs, active in church groups, managing farms, raising families. And meanwhile, the boys had their own practical tracks. Ag and mechanics, it was a whole community focus.
Parallel tracks, reflecting the times, but both aimed at equipping young people to contribute meaningfully.
And the legacy, it lasted. Those skills learned in the cottage in those circles, passed down through generations, really shaping families in the community.
That intergenerational transfer is key. These weren't just school subjects, they were life skills woven into the community's fabric.
Okay, now let's talk about the brick that built a town. That's what the scrapbook calls the red brick schoolhouse they built in 1930.
Sounds significant.
Oh, it was huge. Not just another building. It became the landmark, a real monument. People started referencing time by it before the brick school, after the brick school. It symbolized progress, community pride, a solid investment in their future.
That kind of building represents a major step forward. More modern, more permanent facilities. A real commitment.
Though there's a little mystery attached. Apparently it was built 10 feet shorter than planned.
Really?
Nobody seems to know. The blueprints were clear, but, well, the scrapbook suggests some stories just have those little unanswered questions that become part of local legend.
Adds a bit of character, doesn't it? A reminder that history always has these little quirks.
The building itself sounded great for the time. Classrooms full of sunlight, modern high-low plate blackboards.
High-low plate?
Yeah, a type of blackboard. Plus a gymnasium and that 2-story ag and home ec building we mentioned.
The one with the goats in the attic?
That's the one. And the library, run by Irma Watkins Mears, was actually in a Masonic Vante room. Just shows again how intertwined everything was.
It paints a picture of a pretty well-equipped school for the 1930s. A big improvement, offering more opportunities. PE, a library.
There's a really moving story in the scrapbook, too, about a young woman, pregnant at the time, who ran a boarding house for the bricklayers building the school.
Oh.
She remembered the hard work, but also the kindness of the Masons, the Peck brothers. She literally watched every brick go up. And when the building was finally torn down in 1974, she felt a real personal loss.
That's powerful. It shows just how deep the emotional connection was between the community and that building. It wasn't just bricks and mortar. It had their shared history.
But in a way, it lived on. The bricks. They were used to veneer the Eden Baptist Church just south of town.
Fitting afterlife.
Isn't it? The scrapbook really drives home that this school did more than teach kids. It raised generations, it anchored the town, shows just how central education was to rural life.
That reuse of the bricks is a great symbol of continuity, of the enduring value of community institutions. The school's influence went far beyond its physical walls.
Okay, finally, let's touch on playing for pride. Sports in FtnHill, especially in the early 30s.
Community spirit time.
Definitely. That gymnasium became a real focus point, especially during the Depression. A place for people to gather, cheer on their team.
School sports often do that, right? Build identity, provide a common rallying point. FtnHill seems like a classic example.
They had challenges early on, though. Homemade basketball uniforms.
Paid for by box suppers.
Yep. And they played on dirt courts. But then, 1932, the girls' basketball championship team.
Legendary.
Totally. Names like Merle Woods, Mildred Forrester, Pauline Cooey, Coach Herbert B. Boothby, they became local heroes.
And girls' sports were still pretty novel then, right?
Relatively, yeah. So FtnHill's support for that team, it actually shows a pretty progressive attitude for the time, I think.
Definitely. Celebrating the girls' achievements like that, it's a source of collective pride. Very inspiring.
And then, the one-season football team.
Oh, this sounds good.
Talk about making do. The uniforms were mucky mustard yellow duck cloth. They apparently had to recruit local men, guys not even in school, just to field a full team.
Ringers.
Practices were just out in open pastures, wherever they could find a flat spot. Shows real determination.
That resourcefulness, the improvisation, it just captures that spirit of doing what you can with what you have.
Yeah.
And involving older guys.
Yeah.
Shows how close the school and town were.
The stories from that season are gold. Playing in Wilmot in ankle-deep mud. Playing at Drew Central in the snow.
Wow. Tough conditions.
But one player remembered, I guess we won some, lost some, I don't suppose it matters. We had fun. And the girls' team helped out at football practice.
No way.
Yeah. There's this hilarious anecdote about a girl getting her shirt accidentally ripped off in a scrimmage.
Oh my gosh.
And just laughing and keeping playing. Now that's team spirit.
That's dedication.
Yeah.
It really emphasizes the fun, the camaraderie, more than just winning or losing. It was about being part of it together.
The scrapbook makes it clear these teams weren't just extracurriculars, they were expressions of community identity, belonging, especially that 32 girls team, a real symbol of excellence. Years later, Mildred Morrister Hobbs was inducted into the Ashley County Hall of Fame, deservedly so.
That's wonderful recognition.
Now, eventually, organized sports changed in Fountain Hill. Population shifts, more school consolidations, things changed. But those memories, those dusty, muddy, beautiful years of playing for pride, they clearly stuck with people.
That legacy is about the unity, the pride they built together, those shared experiences on the court, on the field. They strengthen the whole community.
So, wrapping up this deep dive into Frank Denson's scrapbook, wow. We've seen this incredible evolution of education in Fountain Hill.
From that early frontier academy.
Right, to the consolidated schools, the brick building. It's a story of amazing resourcefulness, incredible community spirit, and just this deep, unwavering value placed on education.
And individuals like V.S. Bright making such a difference.
Absolutely. The scrapbook is just packed with these rich, personal memories of school life. It really brings that history alive.
It really does. What's so powerful is how this scrapbook gives such a vivid personal look with education as the central thread running through it all.
And it really gets you thinking, doesn't it? Those themes, community support, adapting to challenges, valuing education. How do those resonate today in our own communities?
Yeah, facing our own challenges, our own opportunities.
Maybe it's worth thinking about the foundations of our own towns, our own cities. What stories are in our scrapbooks? What lessons are there about community strength?
That's a great point to ponder. Looking back at how communities built themselves, their priorities, it can definitely offer perspective for today and for the future.
Well, thank you for taking this deep dive into Fountain Hill's history with us. It's really been a privilege to explore this amazing scrapbook and share these stories with you.